The icy wind howled through the narrow streets of the small, forgotten town, carrying with it the bitter chill of winter. Snowflakes danced in the air, settling on the cracked pavement and the rusted roofs of abandoned buildings. In the midst of this desolate landscape, a lone figure moved silently, his paws leaving faint imprints in the fresh snow. Rusty, a scruffy mutt with a coat that had once been a rich golden brown but was now matted and dull, limped along the edge of the road. His ribs protruded through his thin fur, and his eyes, though weary, held a flicker of determination. He had been through hell and back, and yet he refused to give up. The scars on his body told a story of pain, betrayal, and survival. One particularly deep gash ran across his left shoulder, a reminder of the night he had finally found the courage to escape. That night, the air had been thick with the stench of blood and fear, the sounds of snarling dogs and cheering men echoing in his ears. Rusty had been one of them, forced into a life of violence and cruelty. But he had fought back, and in the chaos of a poorly secured gate, he had made his escape. Now, as he wandered the frozen streets, Rusty's mind drifted back to those dark days. He remembered the cold, damp concrete floor of his cage, the sharp sting of a whip, and the hollow ache of hunger that never seemed to go away. He remembered the faces of the other dogs, some broken, some defiant, but all victims of the same cruel fate. And he remembered Victor, the man who had orchestrated it all. Victor's face was etched into Rusty's memory, his cold, calculating eyes and the cruel twist of his lips as he watched the dogs fight for their lives. Rusty shook his head, as if trying to dispel the memories. He couldn't afford to dwell on the past. Not now, not when survival was all that mattered. The town was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes with a heavy snowfall. The streets were empty, the windows of the houses dark. Rusty's breath came in small, visible puffs as he padded along, his nose twitching at the faint scent of food. He followed the scent, his stomach growling in anticipation. It led him to a dumpster behind a small, rundown repair shop. The shop looked like it had seen better days. The paint was peeling, the sign above the door was cracked, and the windows were fogged with grime. But to Rusty, it was just another place to scavenge. He approached the dumpster cautiously, his ears pricked and his senses on high alert. The scent of discarded food was stronger now, and his mouth watered. He nudged the lid of the dumpster with his nose, pushing it open just enough to peer inside. The sight of half-eaten sandwiches and rotting fruit made his stomach churn, but hunger overrode his disgust. He jumped up, his paws scrabbling against the side of the dumpster, and managed to pull out a stale piece of bread. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep him going for another day. As he ate, Rusty's sharp ears caught the sound of footsteps crunching in the snow. He froze, his body tense, ready to bolt at a moment's notice. He turned his head slightly, his eyes scanning the shadows. A figure emerged from the darkness, a man, bundled in a thick coat and scarf, his face partially hidden by the brim of his hat. The man stopped a few feet away, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Hey there, buddy," he said softly, his voice warm and gentle. "You hungry?" Rusty's instinct screamed at him to run, but something about the man's tone gave him pause. He had heard too many harsh voices, too many angry shouts, to trust easily. But this man's voice was different. It was calm, soothing, and devoid of any threat. The man crouched down, placing a piece of roasted chicken on the ground. The aroma was irresistible, and Rusty's stomach growled loudly. He took a cautious step forward, his eyes never leaving the man. The man didn't move, didn't speak, just waited patiently. Rusty inched closer, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. The scent of the chicken was overwhelming, and before he knew it, he was devouring the food. He ate quickly, his eyes flicking up to the man every few bites as if expecting him to lash out. But the man just watched him with a kind smile, his hands resting on his knees. When the food was gone, Rusty hesitated. He wanted to stay, to bask in the warmth of the man's presence, but his instincts told him to flee. He took a step back, his tail tucked between his legs, and then turned and disappeared into the night. The man watched him go, a thoughtful expression on his face. He had seen stray dogs before, but there was something different about this one. The dog moved with a cautious dignity, his eyes scanning his surroundings as if expecting danger at every corner. And the scars, those scars told a story of hardship and survival. The man sighed and stood up, brushing the snow off his coat. He glanced at the dumpster, then at the spot where the dog had been standing. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" he murmured to himself. "I'll see you around, buddy." As he walked back to his shop, the man couldn't shake the image of the dog from his mind. He had always had a soft spot for animals, especially those who had known hardship. And this dog, this scruffy, scarred, and wary creature, had touched something deep within him. Little did he know, their paths would cross again, and this chance encounter would change both of their lives forever. The repair shop was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes with years of solitude. Sam sat on a rickety stool behind the counter, a half-empty cup of coffee cooling in his hands. The shop was cluttered with tools, spare parts, and unfinished projects, but it was his sanctuary. It had been his father's shop before him, and now it was all he had left. The television in the corner played a news segment about the upcoming winter storm, but Sam wasn't paying attention. His mind was elsewhere, drifting to memories of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. It had been 5 years since his wife, Clara, had passed away, and the ache of her absence still lingered. She had been the one who brought light into his life, who made the shop feel like a home. Without her, the walls seemed to close in on him, and the silence was deafening. Sam sighed and set the coffee cup down, running a hand through his graying hair. He glanced at the clock on the wall. It was past closing time, but he wasn't in a hurry to go home. Home was just an empty house now, filled with reminders of what he had lost. As he stood up to lock the shop, a movement outside caught his eye. He peered through the fogged-up window and saw a shadowy figure near the dumpster. At first he thought it was a raccoon or a stray cat, but as he squinted he realized it was a dog. A scruffy, thin dog with a coat that had seen better days. Sam hesitated for a moment, then grabbed his coat and stepped outside. The cold air hit him like a slap, and he pulled his coat tighter around him. The dog, a mutt with patches of brown and white fur, looked up at him, its eyes wary but curious. "Hey there," Sam said softly, crouching down to the dog's level. "You look like you've had a rough day." The dog took a step back, its tail tucked between its legs. Sam could see the scars on its body, the way it flinched at the slightest movement. This dog had been through something terrible, and it showed. Sam reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of jerky he had been snacking on earlier. He held it out, his hand steady. "Here, buddy. You look like you could use this." The dog's nose twitched, and it took a cautious step forward. Its eyes darted between Sam's face and the jerky, as if trying to decide if it was worth the risk. Finally, hunger won out, and the dog snatched the jerky from Sam's hand, retreating to a safe distance to eat it. Sam watched as the dog devoured the food, his heart aching for the poor creature. He had always had a soft spot for animals, especially those who had been dealt a bad hand at life. This dog reminded him of himself in a way, broken, but still trying to survive. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" Sam murmured, more to himself than to the dog. "I'll see you around, buddy." Over the next few days, Sam started leaving food out for the dog. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the loneliness, or maybe it was the way the dog's eyes seemed to mirror his own pain. Whatever the reason, he found himself looking forward to their brief encounters. The dog, however, was still wary. It would only come when Sam wasn't around, sneaking in to eat the food he left out before disappearing into the shadows. But slowly, it began to linger a little longer, its sharp eyes watching Sam from a distance. One evening, as a snowstorm raged outside, Sam was closing up the shop when he heard a soft whine at the door. He opened it to find the dog standing there, its fur dusted with snow and its body shivering from the cold. "Well, look who's back," Sam said, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You finally decided to trust me, huh?" The dog hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside, its tail giving the faintest wag. Sam closed the door behind him, shutting out the cold and the storm. For the first time in years, the shop didn't feel so empty. The snowstorm had turned the town into a frozen wasteland, the streets blanketed in white and the wind howling like a wounded animal. Inside the repair shop, however, it was warm and quiet, the faint hum of the heater filling the air. Sam sat on the floor, a blanket draped over his shoulders, watching as Rusty cautiously explored the unfamiliar surroundings. The dog moved slowly, his nose twitching as he sniffed every corner of the shop. His ears were perked, and his eyes darted around, taking in every detail. It was clear that Rusty wasn't used to being indoors, and the unfamiliar environment made him nervous. Sam stayed still, not wanting to spook him. He had learned over the past few days that Rusty was a creature of caution, and any sudden movement could send him bolting back into the cold. So he sat there, his hands resting on his knees, and waited. Rusty paused near the workbench, his attention caught by a loose screw that had fallen to the floor. He nudged it with his nose, then looked up at Sam as if asking for permission. "Go ahead," Sam said softly, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "It's all yours." Rusty picked up the screw in his mouth, his tail giving a tentative wag. It was the first time Sam had seen him show any sign of playfulness, and it warmed his heart. Over the next hour, Rusty continued to explore the shop, his movements becoming less cautious and more curious. He sniffed at the tools, pawed at a pile of old rags, and even ventured close enough to Sam to sniff his outstretched hand. Sam held his breath as Rusty's cold nose brushed against his fingers. The dog hesitated for a moment, then pressed his head into Sam's palm, his tail wagging slightly. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to Sam. "You're safe here, buddy," Sam whispered, gently scratching behind Rusty's ears. "No one's going to hurt you anymore." Rusty leaned into the touch, his body relaxing for the first time in what felt like forever. For a moment, the storm outside didn't matter. The cold, the loneliness, the pain, it all faded away, replaced by a sense of peace and connection. As the night wore on, Sam made a makeshift bed for Rusty out of an old blanket and a cardboard box. He placed it near the heater where it was warm and cozy. Rusty eyed the bed warily at first, but after a few minutes of hesitation, he curled up on the blanket, his body sinking into the soft material. Sam watched as Rusty drifted off to sleep, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. The dog looked so peaceful, so content, that it brought a lump to Sam's throat. He hadn't realized how much he had missed this, the simple joy of caring for someone, of being needed. The next morning, Sam woke up to find Rusty sitting by the door, his leash in his mouth. The dog's eyes were bright with excitement, and his tail wagged furiously when he saw Sam stirring. "You ready to go out, huh?" Sam said, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. He grabbed his coat and clipped the leash onto Rusty's collar. "Let's see what the world looks like after a snowstorm." As they stepped outside, the world was transformed. The snow had stopped falling, and the sun was peeking through the clouds, casting a golden glow over the white landscape. Rusty bounded through the snow, his nose buried in the powdery flakes, his tail wagging with pure joy. Sam watched him with a smile, his heart swelling with affection. It was amazing how much Rusty had changed in just a few days. The wary, skittish dog who had first appeared at his doorstep was slowly becoming more confident, more trusting. But as they walked, Sam couldn't shake the feeling that Rusty's past wasn't done with him yet. The scars on his body, the way he flinched at loud noises, it all pointed to a life of pain and hardship. And Sam knew that healing would take time. For now, though, he was content to take it one day at a time. Rusty had found a safe place to call home, and Sam had found a reason to smile again. Together they were learning to trust, to heal, and to hope. The days grew colder, and the snow piled higher. But inside Sam's repair shop, there was a warmth that hadn't been there in years. Rusty had become a constant presence, his playful antics and quiet companionship filling the void that Sam hadn't even realized was there. The dog had settled into his new life with surprising ease, though his scars, both physical and emotional, were a constant reminder of the past he had escaped. One evening, as Sam was closing up the shop, a sharp knock at the door startled him. Rusty, who had been dozing by the heater, jumped to his feet, his ears perked and his body tense. Sam frowned. It was late, and he wasn't expecting anyone. He grabbed a flashlight and cautiously approached the door. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice firm but not unkind. There was a pause, and then a voice, young and trembling, replied, "Please, I need help." Sam opened the door to find a boy standing on the doorstep, shivering in the cold. He looked to be about 16, with messy brown hair and a thin jacket that was no match for the winter weather. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide with fear. "Come in," Sam said without hesitation, stepping aside to let the boy in. Rusty stayed close to Sam, his eyes fixed on the stranger, but he didn't growl or bark. The boy stumbled inside, his teeth chattering. Sam grabbed a blanket from the couch and wrapped it around the boy's shoulders. "Sit down," he said gently. "I'll get you something warm to drink." As Sam busied himself making hot cocoa, the boy sat on the edge of the couch, his eyes darting around the room. Rusty approached him cautiously, sniffing at his shoes and then his hands. The boy froze, his breath catching in his throat, but when Rusty nudged his hand with his nose, he relaxed slightly. "He's friendly," Sam said, setting a steaming mug of cocoa on the table in front of the boy. "His name's Rusty." The boy reached out to pet Rusty, his hand trembling. "I'm Eli," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Sam sat down across from him, studying the boy's face. "What brings you out on a night like this, Eli?" Eli hesitated, his fingers tightening around the mug. I didn't have anywhere else to go." Sam nodded, not pushing for more. He could see the fear in Eli's eyes, the way he flinched at every sound. It reminded him of Rusty when he had first arrived, broken, scared, and unsure of who to trust. "You're safe here," Sam said, echoing the words he had once spoken to Rusty. "No one's going to hurt you." Eli looked up at him, his eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. "Thank you," he whispered. Over the next few days, Eli stayed at the shop, helping Sam with small tasks and slowly opening up about his past. He had run away from home, he said, though he didn't elaborate on why. Sam didn't press him, knowing that trust, like healing, took time. One evening as they sat by the heater, Rusty curled up at their feet, Eli finally shared the truth. "I know the man who hurt Rusty," he said, his voice trembling. "His name's Victor. He runs a dogfighting ring. I used to work for him." Sam's heart sank. He had suspected that Rusty's scars were the result of something terrible, but hearing it confirmed made his blood boil. "Why did you work for him?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Eli looked down at his hands, his shoulders hunched. "My brother owed him money, a lot of money. When he couldn't pay, Victor made me work for him. I didn't have a choice." Sam reached out, placing a hand on Eli's shoulder. "You're not there anymore," he said firmly. "You're safe now, both of you." Eli nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. I don't want him to find me, or Rusty." Sam's jaw tightened. He had always tried to avoid trouble, to live a quiet, uneventful life. But now, with Eli and Rusty depending on him, he knew he couldn't stay on the sidelines. "We'll figure this out," Sam said, his voice steady. "Together." Rusty, sensing the tension in the room, let out a soft whine and rested his head on Eli's lap. The boy smiled faintly, scratching behind Rusty's ears. "He's a good dog," Eli said softly. "He deserves to be happy." "So do you," Sam replied. The days following Eli's arrival were tense. Sam had doubled down on security at the shop, installing extra locks and keeping a close eye on the streets. Rusty, too, seemed to sense the growing danger. He was more alert than usual, his ears constantly twitching at the slightest sound, and he rarely left Sam's side. Eli, meanwhile, was a bundle of nerves. He jumped at every knock on the door and spent most of his time huddled near the heater, his eyes darting to the windows as if expecting Victor to appear at any moment. Sam tried to reassure him, but he knew that until Victor was dealt with, none of them would truly be safe. One evening, as Sam was closing up the shop, a loud crash from the alley outside made him freeze. Rusty let out a low growl, his body tense and his eyes fixed on the door. Eli, who had been sweeping the floor, dropped the broom and backed away, his face pale. "Stay here," Sam said, grabbing a flashlight and a wrench from the workbench. He moved cautiously toward the door, Rusty at his heels. The alley was dark, the only light coming from the flickering street lamp at the far end. Sam's breath fogged in the cold air as he stepped outside, his flashlight cutting through the shadows. At first, he saw nothing, just the dumpster and the piles of snow that had been pushed to the sides. Then, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. His eyes were cold and calculating, and the smirk on his lips sent a chill down Sam's spine. "Evening," the man said, his voice smooth but laced with menace. "You must be Sam." Sam tightened his grip on the wrench. "Who's asking?" The man took a step closer, his hands in his pockets as if he didn't have a care in the world. "Name's Victor. I believe you have something of mine." Rusty let out a fierce bark, his teeth bared and his hackles raised. Victor's eyes flicked to the dog and his smirk widened. "Ah, there he is. I've been looking for you, boy." Sam stepped in front of Rusty, shielding him from Victor's gaze. "He's not yours anymore," he said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his gut. Victor chuckled, a low, humorless sound. "See, that's where you're wrong. That dog belongs to me, and so does the kid inside." Sam's heart pounded. He had known this moment would come, but he hadn't expected it to happen so soon. "Eli's not going anywhere," he said firmly, "and neither is Rusty." Victor's smirk faded, replaced by a cold, hard expression. "You don't get to make that decision," he said, taking another step forward. "I suggest you hand them over before things get messy." Rusty lunged forward, his bark echoing through the alley. Victor barely flinched, but the sound seemed to snap Sam out of his fear. He raised the wrench, his voice firm. "Get off my property," he said. "Now." For a moment, Victor just stared at him, his eyes narrowing. Then, with a shrug, he took a step back. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You'll regret crossing me." With that, he turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Sam and Rusty standing in the cold, their breath visible in the frosty air. Sam waited until he was sure Victor was gone before lowering the wrench. His hands were trembling, but he forced himself to stay calm. He knelt down beside Rusty, scratching behind the dog's ears. "You're a brave boy," he said softly, "but this is just the beginning." Back inside the shop, Eli was waiting, his face pale and his eyes wide with fear. "Was that?" he began, but Sam cut him off with a nod. "It was Victor," Sam said, his voice grim. "He's not going to stop until he gets what he wants." Eli sank onto the couch, his hands shaking. "What are we going to do?" Sam sat down beside him, his mind racing. He knew they couldn't fight Victor alone. He was too powerful, too dangerous. But he also knew he couldn't let Victor win, not after everything Rusty and Eli had been through. "We'll figure something out," Sam said, his voice steady. "But for now, we need to stay together. No one goes anywhere alone, understood?" Eli nodded, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. Rusty, sensing the tension, rested his head on Eli's lap, his tail giving a faint wag. As the three of them sat there, the storm raging outside, Sam felt a surge of resolve. He didn't know how they were going to beat Victor, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let him take Rusty or Eli, not without a fight. The days following Victor's visit were filled with tension. Sam had installed extra locks on the doors and windows, and he kept a close eye on the streets whenever he stepped outside. Rusty, too, was on high alert, his ears constantly twitching at the slightest sound. Eli, meanwhile, was a bundle of nerves, jumping at every knock on the door and spending most of his time huddled near the heater. One evening, as they sat around the table eating dinner, Sam brought up the topic that had been weighing on his mind. "We can't just sit here and wait for Victor to make his move," he said, his voice firm. "We need to take the fight to him." Eli looked up from his plate, his eyes wide with fear. "What do you mean?" "We need evidence," Sam explained. "Something that will put Victor away for good. If we can prove what he's doing, the police will have no choice but to act." Eli hesitated, his hands trembling as he set down his fork. "Victor's careful," he said softly. "He doesn't leave anything to chance, but I might know where we can find something." Sam leaned forward, his interest piqued. "Where?" "There's a warehouse on the outskirts of town," Eli said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's where he keeps the dogs before the fights. He also keeps records there, names, dates, payouts. If we can get inside, we might find something we can use." Sam nodded, his mind racing. It was a risky plan, but it was their best shot at stopping Victor. "We'll need to be careful," he said. "Victor's not going to make this easy." Rusty, who had been lying at Sam's feet, let out a soft whine as if sensing the danger ahead. Sam reached down to scratch behind the dog's ears. "You'll help us, won't you, boy?" he said softly. Rusty wagged his tail, his eyes filled with determination. The next night, under the cover of darkness, Sam, Eli, and Rusty set out for the warehouse. The streets were quiet, the only sound the crunch of their boots on the snow-covered pavement. Rusty led the way, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air, his body tense with anticipation. The warehouse loomed ahead, its windows dark and its doors locked. Sam motioned for Eli to stay back as he approached the building, his flashlight cutting through the shadows. He found a side door that was slightly ajar and slipped inside, Rusty and Eli close behind. The interior of the warehouse was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of damp wood and fear. Rows of cages lined the walls, each one empty but for the faint traces of blood and fur. Sam's stomach churned at the sight, but he forced himself to focus. "The office is this way," Eli whispered, leading them to a small room at the back of the warehouse. The door was locked, but Sam pulled a set of tools from his pocket and got to work. After a few tense moments, the lock clicked open, and they stepped inside. The office was cluttered with papers, ledgers, and a computer. Sam quickly began sifting through the documents, his heart pounding as he realized the extent of Victor's operation. There were lists of names, dates, and amounts of money, as well as photos of dogs, some alive, some not. "This is it," Sam said, his voice filled with a mix of relief and anger. "This is what we need." Eli nodded, his hands trembling as he helped gather the evidence. Rusty, meanwhile, stood guard at the door, his ears perked and his eyes scanning the shadows. Just as they were about to leave, a loud crash echoed through the warehouse. Sam froze, his heart pounding. "We need to go," he whispered, shoving the documents into his bag. They moved quickly but quietly, Rusty leading the way. As they reached the side door, a voice called out from the darkness. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Sam didn't hesitate. He grabbed Eli's arm and pulled him outside, Rusty close behind. They sprinted through the snow, their breath visible in the cold air, the sound of footsteps echoing behind them. When they finally reached the safety of the shop, Sam locked the door and leaned against it, his chest heaving. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with relief. "We've got what we need." Eli nodded, his face pale but determined. "Now what?" "Now," Sam said, "we take this to the police." The evidence they had gathered from the warehouse was damning. Names, dates, payouts, and photos, all of it painted a clear picture of Victor's illegal dogfighting operation. Sam and Eli spent the next few days organizing the documents and preparing to take them to the police. Rusty, sensing the tension, stayed close to them, his eyes alert and his body tense. One evening, as they sat around the table going through the evidence, there was a knock at the door. Sam's heart skipped a beat, but when he looked through the window, he saw Rachel, the lawyer who had helped them before. "I've reviewed everything," Rachel said as she stepped inside, her face grim. "This is more than enough to bring Victor down. I've already contacted the police and they're preparing a raid on his compound." Sam felt a surge of relief, but it was tempered by caution. "What about Victor's men?" he asked. "They're not going to go down without a fight." Rachel nodded. "The police are aware of the risks. They'll have a SWAT team on standby, but we need to be careful. Victor's not going to take this lying down." The night of the raid was tense. Sam, Eli, and Rusty waited at the shop, their nerves on edge. The police had assured them that they would handle everything, but Sam couldn't shake the feeling that they were still in danger. As the hours passed, Sam's phone buzzed with updates from Rachel. The raid was underway, and Victor's men were putting up a fight. But the police were making progress, and it was only a matter of time before Victor was arrested. Just as Sam was starting to relax, there was a loud crash from the alley outside. Rusty jumped to his feet, his ears perked and his body tense. Sam grabbed a flashlight and cautiously approached the door, his heart pounding. When he opened the door, he saw Victor standing in the alley, his face twisted with rage. "You think you can take me down?" Victor snarled, his voice filled with venom. "You're nothing but a small-town nobody. You'll regret crossing me." Sam stepped outside, his fists clenched. "It's over, Victor," he said, his voice steady. "The police are at your compound. You're finished." Victor's eyes narrowed, and he took a step forward. "Not yet," he said, pulling a knife from his pocket. Before Sam could react, Rusty lunged forward, his teeth bared and his hackles raised. Victor swung the knife, but Rusty dodged it, his movements quick and precise. The dog's growl echoed through the alley, a sound filled with fury and determination. Sam grabbed a nearby shovel and swung it at Victor, forcing him to back away. "Call the police!" he shouted to Eli, who was standing in the doorway, his face pale with fear. Eli fumbled with his phone, his hands trembling as he dialed 911. Meanwhile, Rusty continued to keep Victor at bay, his sharp barks and quick movements preventing the man from getting closer. The sound of sirens filled the air, and within moments the alley was flooded with police cars. Victor tried to run, but Rusty was faster. The dog lunged at him, knocking him to the ground just as the police arrived. "Stay down!" one of the officers shouted, his gun trained on Victor. Sam knelt down beside Rusty, his hands trembling as he scratched behind the dog's ears. "You're a brave boy," he said softly, his voice filled with pride. "You saved us." Rusty wagged his tail, his eyes filled with a mix of exhaustion and triumph. As the police handcuffed Victor and led him away, Sam felt a surge of relief. It was over. Victor was finally going to pay for his crimes, and Rusty and Eli were safe.